let's bring in Rayshawn Ray, a fellow with the Brookings Institution and an associate professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. He also researches racial and social inequality with a focus on interactions between police officers and the communities they serve. Professor, good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So how do you undo or fix a city's department that may have a history of problems with the communities they serve?
I think the first thing is people have to recognize that what's happening in Minneapolis is normative. So as you reported earlier, every 30 hours, a complaint came in about a police officer. Every 40 hours across the United States, a black person is killed by police. And when we start talking about police reform, what we have to realize is that these bad apples come from rotten trees. I mean, even the police chief had to sue his own department. So I think there are a few things we need to do. First, we need to restructure civilian payouts for police misconduct. Eventually, George Floyd's family is going to get a large civil payout. The money that they've paid in taxes is going to be the same money paid back to them for the dehumanization and murder of their loved one. That needs to change. We need to shift it to police department insurances. Second, we need good apple protections. Officers have been asking for the fact that they need protection when they blow the whistle. When these are the good apples.
You're talking about that blue wall of silence. The blue wall of silence, you know, once you penetrate that, if you're an officer, you know, you using colloquial, you know, rat out your fellow officer, you're saying, then, I mean, yeah, then there's payback, and that de-incentivizes, you know, calling out the bad apples?
Without a doubt. I mean, the blue wall of silence extends from police departments to prosecutors' offices to courtrooms. And oftentimes it is the bad apples like Chauvin who are protected instead of the good apples like the chief who has raised concerns. Of course, there have been other examples across the country where officers have raised concerns about misconduct. They're the ones who end up being vilified. They're the ones who end up being suspended. They're the ones who don't get promoted. They're the ones who are sent to a far district away from their home, and then they're the ones that are put on evening shift and night shift when they have children. So we need those good apple protections. I also think that we must move beyond just thinking about chokeholds, body-worn cameras, and implicit bias trainings. I do a lot of that. It matters. But it doesn't matter without some of the structural changes that come along with that.
Okay, so let me ask you about that. Structural change, does that mean complete dismantling of, or does it mean something else?
So I don't necessarily think that it has to be a complete dismantling of, but at the same time, when people have aimed to make change and nothing has happened, oftentimes you do need to literally chop off the roots. And that's what we're seeing in Minneapolis. That's what happened in Camden. I tend to think that restructuring civilian payouts for police misconduct will matter a lot. I think a couple of other things will matter a lot as well that haven't been talked about that my research shows. First, we need to focus on officers as human beings. 80% of police officers report having chronic stress. About 20% of them report having suicidal thoughts. They report addiction, either drugs or alcoholism. These are people who are not mentally well. And the things that we've seen in Buffalo, for example, resemble that. I mean, who pushes an old man down who is old enough to be your grandfather when you could have sidestepped him, and then who goes to the courthouse to cheer on the people who did that? Oftentimes, that's dealing with mental health. And so what we need to ensure is that officers get mental health assistance. This could look like a normative approach where every 90 days, officers go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I think second, we need housing subsidies, which we've seen in a lot of places. But housing subsidies will help officers to deal with the fact that they are underpaid and overstretched.
Wow, you covered a lot of ground there. But then, you know, let's talk about the variation of instances that might underscore the community's concerns about this relationship between police and the community. Just today, we're learning about a man being killed by a police officer at a drive-thru at a Wendy's, a restaurant in Atlanta last night. Former Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams just tweeted this, saying, quote, "The killing of Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta last night demands we severely restrict the use of deadly force. Yes, investigations must be called for, but so too should accountability. Sleeping in a drive-thru must not end in death." What do you make of it? I mean, there's a lot in between what we hear, the report of a man sleeping at a Wendy's, and then, you know, police confirming that this individual was shot, police saying that there was some struggle of a taser, but there's a lot in between. So how do you get at that? The real story of what happened?
So I think the bottom line is this. We know that structural racism matters. We know that interpersonal racism matters. The research that we've conducted at the Lab for Applied Social Science Research at the University of Maryland shows that there is implicit bias among officers regardless of the race of officers. And if we're really going to deal with that, officers must be held accountable, and we have to really understand and recognize that blackness becomes weaponized. That's what we've seen with George Floyd, all the way down to Atlanta, to what we've seen in Louisiana, and even in Central Park. And
meaning you're suspected of being meaning you're suspected of being up to no good. And let's just start with what someone sees: your skin color, the blackness of your skin.
Without a doubt. I mean, when I say blackness becomes weaponized, it's one specific stat that highlights this. Black people are 3.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by police when they're not attacking or have a weapon. Who says that? Police officers themselves. This is about the fact that in our society, we oftentimes have two forms of justice. One for oftentimes white America and another for black America. And that's the reason why people are in the streets. And that is the fundamental change that needs to happen in law enforcement.
Professor Rayshawn Ray, we'll leave it there for now. We'll certainly have you back to the University of Maryland. Thank you so much.
Thank you.